Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. I'm really glad that Willow Willson is actually writing Wonder Woman now, because it gives me another foil to test my mettle against, I guess you'd say, because you can only go over the crazy at Marvel so many times. And this gives me something else to look at. And I want to look specifically at the first thing that she's doing for DC, the first thing that she's doing for Wonder Woman, this first story arc called The Just War. So I want to look at this and see what Willow Willson thinks that she is doing with this storyline and how she is dealing with this question. Now, I already went over this a little bit in another video when I went over the New York Times article that they did for her taking over Wonder Woman. But there's another article that I ran into where they interview her about this as well. So I'm going to link both of those in the description if you want to go read them. They're both fairly short. And from this other article, there's one quote which I want to read you. She's asked the specific question: did you look at any just war theory in preparation for writing Just War? And her answer is this: what I write tends to be a culmination of what I read in the months and years prior to getting the assignment. I didn't look at any specific theology. I do know the Islamic perspective. I did have conversations with a dear friend who is an Iraq war veteran and has served in various branches of the government, who has been involved in this new asymmetrical war, to see how they feel. Is there such a thing as a just war? I didn't set out to answer the question about whether or not there is, but I lay out the options and let the reader decide. So this is what she thinks she's doing. If she is specifically laying out options so that the reader can decide for themselves, she is claiming that she is presenting this in an unbiased way, because if she's being biased, then she's not actually letting the reader decide for themselves. She's shoving them in one direction so that they answer it in their heads in the way that she wants them to answer it. So she's claiming to be unbiased here. And I want to test that with what she says in these other interviews and in what she puts in these books. So, where in the world does she get the experience or the knowledge to actually talk about whether or not a just war exists? Let's look at it in that way. Quite specifically, according to this question that was asked her. Now, does she have any practical experience? No, she does not. Has she ever been a soldier? Has she ever been in combat? No, she has not. Did she do any research and talk to people about this subject specifically? Well, what does she say here? Quite specifically, she talked to one dear friend who is an Iraq war veteran. That's it. I'm sorry, I've done research for a number of different things. Talking with a dear friend about the subject does not constitute research. So she has no practical experience, nor does she research into the practical experience of this. So I understand that you may not have practical experience of a subject, and you can still talk about it, because you might have intellectual experience of that subject. You might have something else to bring to the table besides the practical. I understand that. So since we discount the practical because of what she says here and her life experience, then all we have left is the intellectual. And I want to ask that question then, where does the intellectual come from? Now, specifically, they ask in this question, did she read any just war theories? And her answer is no. She says she didn't read any specific theology and doesn't go beyond that point. So she didn't look at the philosophical. So she discounts that. Well, what else is there to look at? Well, did she look at the historical? Either of the subject matter that she's dealing with, either actually in history or the history of the character? Well, let's test that. And that's where specifically I come into this. Now, I want to test that according to a panel that they are putting out, DC is putting out, as a representation of this entire storyline. And I'll give you this panel right here. And I realize that this panel is horrible art, but try to just let that pass by and look at Wonder Woman's words here. She's standing over a fallen soldier, and she says, "You fire on a fallen enemy? Very well. If the corrupt will not stand down, the righteous must stand up." These are the specific words that Willow Willson is putting in the mouth of Wonder Woman. Now, to get this out of the way right at the first, if you know anything about war or combat, which obviously she doesn't, you would know that making sure that your enemy is down and dead is something you do on the battlefield. You confirm a kill. You make sure that he's not just down, but he is dead. And quite specifically, she says, fallen enemy. So this guy is the enemy, right? Quite specifically, the soldiers are simply doing their jobs in making sure that an enemy is dead. Let's just get that right out of the way. But let's look at the words here. What knowledge does G. Willow Willson have to talk about corruption and righteousness on a battlefield and in a war? Does she have any historical knowledge, understanding of this? I would say no as well. Because, well, let's look at Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is an Amazon. She grew up as an ancient Greek. She actually, worships the Greek gods. That's where she gets her powers from. And she would actually have grown up in a place where they would be Greek and they would speak Greek. And all of this stuff would be in her history. And G. Willow Willson did say in the article, the New York Times article, that she specifically did look at the myth and she wanted to just juxtapose that myth that she knows with Wonder Woman having to deal with things on a daily basis that everyone has to deal with, like, in her words, smartphones and the gender pay gap. Yeah, those are her words. So she claims she did look into this. But I am actually someone who spent a significant amount of their time in university actually studying these things, so let's test that out. Let's just look, just randomly, at what would happen on a Greek battlefield for a moment, okay? Now, if you were fighting against an enemy and you disarmed them and they were down, well, you killed them. They only had an option that was a desperate last measure. And what they usually did was they would become a suppliant. They would grab your knees and say, please don't kill me. But you had to have a reason to say, please don't kill me. And the reason was usually twofold. You would either say, hey, we have some kind of family connection. You can't kill me. Or, that family connection could be a guest connection. That is to say, our fathers did swear to each other and exchange gifts at one point that they would be friends forever, and that would include us as well. Therefore, you cannot kill me. So they would say this. This would be part of their reasoning. Say, don't kill me. And this would be something that happened at times if you look at the literature, and you would actually then decide whether or not you are going to kill this person in front of you. And it was still a decision. It wasn't automatically you had to let them live. Now, if you killed them, well, you might provoke some anger of the gods, but it was still something that was, maybe, maybe not. You could kill them. The other one was, hey, guess what? I'm really rich. I will make you a lot of money if you ransom me back to my people. And at that point, the guy would say, maybe I'll kill you, maybe I won't. And he would just think to himself, well, is it worth killing you now, or is it worth more to keep you alive? And that was specifically the answer, whether or not he would kill the person that's down on his back. Quite literally, this is what the Greeks did on the battlefield. All right? If there was no reason for you to supplicate yourself before your enemy who had made you fall, they would simply kill you. And not just kill you, but if they killed you and you were a good kill of someone who was their enemy and he stood over your body, then he would get his cohorts to come and strip off your armor as trophies of that kill. And then, if they still had the time, they would take your body back to their camp and desecrate it in order to make sure that the people on the other side never got to bury your body. That's what the Greeks did on the battlefield. If you look at Achilles and his killing of Hector, what he did with his body was he took a rope and he cut holes in the legs of Hector so that he could run the rope through both of them. He attached it to the back of his chariot and then drove the chariot around the city again and again and again, dragging the body of Hector around the city so that he would make everybody in the city lose hope that they were ever going to win and know that he was desecrating the body of his enemy. This is what Greeks would do on the battlefield. But no, this is what G. Willow Willson thinks that a Greek would do on the battlefield. Say, I am righteous, you are corrupt. This is just preposterous. And let's take this down to Wonder Woman herself, okay? Wonder Woman would have grown up speaking ancient Greek, and I actually know ancient Greek. I haven't used it in a millennia or two, but I actually know ancient Greek. You want to know what the ancient Greek word for righteousness is? It's dikaiosoini, which is from the root word daiki, which is justice. That is to say, she's claiming that I am doing the just thing here when she says righteous. And Daiki was a god, the god of justice. And mythically, did the Amazons have anything to do with the god of justice? No, they did not. They worshipped Ares, the god of war. They built temples to Ares, the god of war. And there's even a part in the Argonautica. I remembered this and I looked it up just to make sure that I was remembering this correctly, where this is Jason and the Argonauts, and they're talking about the Amazons, and they're describing them, and they say quite specifically, the Amazons are not an easy foe, and they do not care for justice. Quite specifically, that's the line. In Greek, they use themos, but Daike and themos are actually two Greek words which are used interchangeably by many Greek writers like Sophocles and others. So quite specifically, Amazons were known for not being just, for being unjust people. Okay? And that's the myth surrounding the Amazons. But if you want to look at the historical surrounding the Amazons, I think it's Diodorus of Sicily that gave the best historical account. And he talked about how the Amazons came to be and how they eventually fell. The thing is that there was this queen. She was a warrior queen. And she was so successful at being a warrior queen that she made war with all of the countries surrounding her state. She would attack them, whether they were friend or foe. And she was so good at actually attacking these people that she claimed after a while that she was the daughter of Ares. And she made the army women only, and she took all the men and she mutilated them so that they would not have the strength to fight against her, and she made them all slaves. And if any male child was born, she had decreed that any male child would be either killed or mutilated so that they would never have the strength to fight them, and so they would become slaves. And this is what she did. This is specifically the historical Amazons. And she passed that kingdom on to her daughter, who did the same thing, and she passed that kingdom on to her daughter, which did the same thing, and then they ran into a little historical trouble where they got into some battles that they were defeated at, and guess what happened? All these surrounding countryside that had been ravaged by these Amazons for the last 3 generations just piled onto the Amazons and destroyed them for what they had done to them. That is the historical. There's nothing just in that whatsoever. So G. Willow Willson, in claiming that she went through this myth so that she could take these stories and put them next to the modern, and she just wanted to tell the story like that, yeah. All you got to do is look at this one panel and Wonder Woman talking about righteousness on the battlefield as she stands over a fallen soldier. And if you know anything about Greeks or Greek history, or specifically Amazonian myth or Amazonian history, this is not the case. Not the case whatsoever. And I want to put on top of that, did she actually look into the history of Wonder Woman? No, she did not. And why do I say that? Because there are 2 specific storylines in Wonder Woman in recent memory that go over some of those things that I just talked about. There was one where someone supplicated themselves before her, and she said that she would protect them because she accepted their supplication, and then she had to fight Batman because Batman wanted to take this person in. That was specifically a very Greek storyline. It talked about the history of Greece and the Amazons and how that worked, quite specifically. There was also another storyline where they had the women do the things which the Amazons did historically. They would go out and capture sailors and then get pregnant by them and then kill them and then enslave their children if they were male children. These are storylines in recent Wonder Woman history. And yet, of course, she has no inkling of this from Wonder Woman's history at all. Now, I realize those storylines have been retconned by now, but still, if you actually knew that they exist, you should have some historical perspective both on the Greeks and on Wonder Woman to actually write a storyline that doesn't have Wonder Woman saying things like she is righteous and fighting the corrupt on the battlefield because soldiers want to confirm a kill. So let's go back to that question originally that I had. Where does she think that she gets the intellectual capacity to write an objective telling of this story so that the reader can decide for themselves whether or not there's such a thing as a just war. I have seen no basis whatsoever in anything that we've gone through so far. But later on in this interview, she gives a hint of that. She talks about how she writes. And she's talking about writers in general. And she says, for a lot of writers and artists, what you create is a reflection of your own inner workings and the hope that other people can relate to it. It's a way to create community when you feel most isolated. All right, so this is where she comes up with her stories. This is what she's talking about. These are the fundamental building blocks that she uses to create the story. She has no experience of war to talk about just war. She doesn't go into the history of what a just war is. She doesn't look at the theories. She doesn't look at the theology. She has no understanding of what her subject matter is, either specifically mythically or historically or in the comics itself. How she is writing the story, and thinks that she's presenting this in a way which is unbiased, is to use her own inner reflections to write the story. That's it. And if we look at the New York Times article, what are her inner reflections like? Well, the entire article of the New York Times is her saying that, right wing bad, far left wing good. That's all she's saying. She ends it by saying, here's the quote that I used in my last video. She's talking about leftist leaders, far leftist leaders, I would say. She says, I'm supporting the leaders and trying to be a bastion for them, that is to say, a stronghold for them, and to give them things that are useful and ideas and concepts that are useful to them in their day-to-day lives, because I think the critical thing now is not to give up hope. So if you can provide hope fuel, that is what you can do. So her idea of what she's supposed to be doing as a writer is to provide hope fuel for far leftist leaders so that they can have a bastion, that is to say a stronghold to retreat to, where she can supply them with things that they need, ideas and concepts, so that they can go back out and fight when they're rested. And since she has no outside actual reference, nothing based in reality or truth to talk about this story of righteousness and justice and corruption, and all she's using is these far leftist ideas to describe these things, no, she is not in any way presenting an unbiased look at this question so that the readers can decide for themselves. This is specifically the reason why these people are so dangerous. Now, you have your other SJW writers who just stick it in your face, right? Who are just taking the storyline and saying, yeah, you're going to swallow this whether you like it or not, because this is the way it is from now on. So they're not really trying to deceive at all. But then you have people like G. Willow Willson, who says, no, I'm just going to do this subtly. And she did say that in one of her quotes. She didn't want to present these things in a ham-handed way. She wanted to do it subtly. So what she is doing is she's subtly using these far leftist ideas to say, oh, I'm presenting this in an unbiased way, which is actually completely biased in a very far left-leaning way. Anyways, hopefully I gave you something new to think about. If I did, hit like. Hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a message. Tell me what you think about this storyline of Wonder Woman. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.